Prince Harry has appeared in court, the first royal to do so in 130 years. Harry is giving evidence in a case against Reach, formerly known as the Mirror Group newspapers, the publisher of the Mirror and the Sunday Mirror. Harry has accused the company of publishing 147 articles between 1996 and 2010 that contain information gained by unlawful means. Those means, it's alleged, include phone hacking, acquiring information by deception, and the use of private investigators. The case will examine 33 of those articles. Reach has denied the allegations for 28 of them, while the remaining 5 are not admitted. Things got off to a blistering start in the proceedings when Harry's 55-page witness statement was released to the public. The claims he made in that document formed the basis for his cross-examination by lawyers for the publisher when he took the stand. And some parts are pretty remarkable, including this unprecedented swipe at the government. Our country is judged globally by the state of our press and our government, both of which I believe are at rock bottom. Democracy fails when your press fails to scrutinize and hold the government accountable and instead choose to get into bed with them so they can ensure the status quo. And now I assume the royals are pleased this guy is no longer a working royal, because this would be a bit of a constitutional crisis if he were. There were some other interesting details in that statement. Here's his account of why he's taking this action against the Mirror newspaper group. The fact that it was not just the journalists who were carrying out the unlawful activity, but also those in power who were turning a blind eye to it so as to ensure that it would continue unabated, and who then tried to cover it up when the game was up, is appalling. The fact they're all ganging up to protect each other is the most disturbing part of it all, especially as they're the mothership of online trolling. Trolls react and mobilize to stories they create. People have died as a result, and people will continue to kill themselves by suicide when they can't see any other way out. How much more blood will stain their typing fingers before someone can put a stop to this madness? It's not holding back there. He also went into what it was like to be a teenager, hounded by the tabloids. So he says, in my experience as a member of the royal family, each of us gets cast into a specific role by the tabloid press. You start off as a blank canvas while they work out what kind of person you are and what kind of problems and temptations you might have. They then start to edge you towards playing the role or roles that suit them best and which sell as many papers as possible, especially if you are the spare to the heir. Especially if you are the spare. This doesn't apply to anyone else other than you, though, really, does it? But you're then either the playboy prince, the failure, the dropout, or in my case, the ficko, the cheat, the underage drinker, the irresponsible drug taker. The list goes on. As a teenager and in my early 20s, I ended up feeling as though I was playing up to a lot of the headlines and stereotypes, mainly because I thought that if they are printing this rubbish about me and people were believing it, I may as well do the crime. It was a downward spiral, whereby the tabloids would constantly try and coax me into doing something stupid and would make a good story and sell lots of newspapers. Looking back, such behavior on their part is utterly vile. Ash, solidarity with spares everywhere. Not everyone can be an heir. Some of us are mere spares. Whenever these stories come up, I sort of struggle to work out who I have less sympathy with. I mean, should I care? Should I care what's going on here, Ash?
Critical but unconditional support for Comrade Windsor, say I. To be serious, I think that one of the things about Prince Harry is that he does have a very compelling narrative. And it is one which I think comes from the heart. And it's saying, I was born into a contractual arrangement between a family which did not love me and the most hideous institutions of, tabloid press intrusion. Right? I was born into that. I never had a chance to find out who I was without it. My every waking moment from my earliest memory was defined by the flash of a paparazzi bulb, stories which had some basis in truth, many stories which had no basis in truth. And I watched that kind of scrutiny destroy the people who I love the most notably his mother. Now, that is something which is true. I think it is an undeniable fact that that is his experience. But the problem he's run into today in the witness box is that that's not necessarily cut and dry proof that the Mirror obtained stories about his personal life by unlawful means, because that's what this lawsuit is about. It's about, did the Mirror use phone hacking in order to obtain these stories? And what was really interesting about about Prince Harry is that he wanted to return to, I think, many of these very emotive talking points from his witness statements about what it was like to be him growing up. But what the Mirror's defense was putting pressure on is, but hang on, you're saying that your upbringing was ruined by this general picture of press intrusion. But your lawyers have selected something like 127 articles by the Mirror, and you can't remember if you read them. You can't remember if you read them at the time. You can't remember if the people around you read these particular stories. And you can't necessarily prove that these individual stories had the kind of impact on your life that you're talking about. And furthermore, there's an awful lot of contestation about where some of these details may have come from. So, very often in these kinds of royal stories, you'll have source quotes attributed to an insider or a friend or a pal. And what the Mirror are trying to argue is that they had legitimate sources. There were people who were close to the prince, close to the royal family, who were feeding them these stories. Prince Harry is maintaining, no, 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 these individuals would never have done that. It has to have come from voicemails. Now, there's a really interesting thing which popped up in the court today, which is Prince Harry saying that there was a particular story which appeared in the Mirror in which Paul Burrell, the former butler, I think, to Princess Diana, was referred to as a two-faced little shit. And what's interesting is that this is a moment where he goes, that probably came from a voicemail that I left to my brother. So, in a way, in terms of the case and the direction of this case, which involves not just Prince Harry, of course, it also involves the likes of Doreen Lawrence, the mother of murdered teenager Stephen Lawrence, who alleged that they were victims of phone hacking by the Mirror, is that that's something which is directly relevant to the case. Whereas this other stuff, which I think is compelling, isn't necessarily, because he's talking about how he felt to be a prince. That isn't a smoking gun as to whether the Mirror obtained stories unlawfully. I think the last thing that I want to say is that, of course, it is an inhuman institution. The royal family, I think, is an inhuman institution. It turns some of the most loving and nurturing relationships into ones of competition, suspicion, hierarchy. And I think it poisons, I think, some of the most sacred bonds of family that exist. That's why, even if it wasn't deeply unequal society based on, the hereditary transfer of power, unearned and frankly often looted wealth, even if it wasn't all of those things, I would be like, get rid of it for the good of the individuals at the center of it. Harry, however, wants it both ways. He still wants his title. He still wants his prominence, a prominence which I'm afraid is wholly unearned. Anything that he's done, his philanthropic activities, emerges from the central injustice, which is the position he was born into. And on the one hand, he says, this was a contract that I basically entered into without my consent, but he still wants all the good stuff. He wants less press intrusion, totally fair, but he doesn't want to get rid of the title. And that for me is where my sympathy absolutely stops, which is if you were really about it, if you're really about these values of equality and justice and diversity, all the things you pay lip service to in a Netflix documentary, give up the titles.
Give up the titles. That's the challenge for you, Harry. If you're so goddamn honourable, a real spare would give up the title. As you can probably tell, I haven't been following this story as closely as some of the other stories we're talking about tonight, although I just defer to Ash when it comes to stories on the royals and the British press. So I'm very happy you're here and I'm not going to push back at all. What I am going to show you, though, is one of the weirdest things we've seen connected to this case. It's from Sky News. Of course, cameras haven't been allowed in the court. We don't do that in this country. So we don't have any recordings of Harry's testimony. No problem, though, said Sky, and they gave us this.
I believe that, again, as a child, every single one of these articles played an important role, a destructive role in my growing up. To give any confirmation that I can specifically remember reading the articles at the time, I believe would be speculation. Yes, as you said, more than thousands, maybe millions of articles have been written about me since age 12. Yes, because it's 20 years ago, I simply cannot speculate how it was and whether I saw these articles at the time. I certainly saw lots of articles at the time. The ones I was made aware of because of the behavior and reaction of people in my inner circle. Unfortunately, stories that I've only shared with one or two people within my inner circle ends up front page of newspaper or any page. Your circle of friends starts to shrink and diminish rather rapidly.
That was fucking bizarre. I don't know why they thought that would add an aura of gravitas. And I kind of see this at the moment with these like really bizarre TV decisions where they go, okay, this is going to lend it an aura of real seriousness and I think communicate something to the viewer that, we're not in cloud cuckoo land. And I would rank like this guy who doesn't even look like Prince Harry at all. Like, God love him. It was a phenomenally performed piece. I thought there was a lot of pathos and a lot of emotion in there. The Daniel Day-Lewis of Sky News, I believe they call him. But it's kind of up there with Holly Willoughby being like, oh, deep breath. First of all, are you okay? Like, what the fuck? Who came up with these decisions? It's like they've never met a human being before and don't understand that when you watch that on TV, you're like, this is inherently silly.